Finance Committee will come to order. Trade cheats in China and around the world are constantly looking for new ways to evade U.S. trade laws and rip off American jobs and American workers. They wish to sell illegal products in America, goods made with forced labor, illegally harvested timber, and products that steal our intellectual property. Trade cheats are a grave threat to the American worker, farmer, and businesses. In fact, all Americans who play by the rules. The most offensive example of trade cheating is the state-sponsored forced labor that's rampant in China's Uyghur region. The Chinese government has arbitrarily detained more than 1 million Uyghurs and other Muslim minorities. These detainees find themselves thrown into re-education camps where they're isolated from their families and forced to work under the worst conditions. The Chinese Communist Party's treatment of the Uyghur community is a moral abomination, and it threatens American jobs. The math is pretty simple. You pay poverty wages, you pollute as you please. Chinese companies have been able to flood U.S. markets with cheap goods and undercut all the competition. We believe here on this committee that American workers are the best in the world, but awful hard to compete with slave labor. What's the effect here at home? Factories shuttered, American jobs lost to China. We're going to hear today from Andy Meserve. He's a USW local president whose aluminum factory was idled, in part due to forced labor abroad. The problem is when domestic aluminum factories like Andy's get shut down, China's the only game in town. So companies must commit to cleaning up forced labor in their supply chains. In December of this past year, I launched an investigation into allegations that the auto industry is still relying on supply chains that are tainted by forced labor. The allegation is that components of cars, from steel to batteries to tires, have a huge likelihood of being made with Uyghur forced labor. So we asked our committee, the 8 major automakers, about their supply chains and what they're doing to clean them up. This, of course, is a flagship American industry, employing more than 90,000 Americans, contributing over $700 billion annually to the U.S. economy. America can't allow those jobs to be ripped off and sent to an economy that by strategy pays nothing. U.S. law already prohibits importing products made with forced labor. The challenge is identifying the products and stopping them. Customs agents are on the front lines of this effort. The customs folks have a twofold job. First, intercept shipments that violate U.S. law. Second, they've got to keep legal goods moving efficiently through American ports. A lot has changed since 2016 when the Finance Committee passed our last package of trade enforcement tools. As Senator Crapo remembers, we've been working on these issues. I see Senator Cornyn, Senator Thune, we've been working on these issues for a long time, the 4 of us in a bipartisan way. The Trade Facilitation and Trade Enforcement Act has produced real results. It gave customs new tools to swiftly crack down on duty evasion that hurts American workers and businesses. It's helped keep out counterfeits that threaten American innovation and public safety. He's not here at the time, but Senator Brown deserves a great deal of credit working with us to close an egregious loophole that was letting products made with forced labor come through our markets. Closing that loophole was enormously important because products made with forced labor can't be allowed to enter our country, period. Today, customs has new challenges. COVID-19 changed the way people buy and sell goods. E-commerce has exploded. In this committee, we said years ago that the internet is the shipping lane of the 21st century. And that's certainly been evident over the last couple of years. Shipments have surged. CBP is processing millions more packages, small packages, every day. Fentanyl and other illicit drugs continue to enter through our ports. Illegally fished seafood is entering the U.S. markets and threatening the livelihoods of coastal communities. Counterfeiters rip off American products, posing an economic and health threat to American citizens. Intellectual property theft is estimated to cost the U.S. economy up to $600 billion every year, much of it from China. Foreign companies continue to find new ways to work their way around our trade laws. Keeping out the trade cheats is something of a game of whack-a-mole. In my view, stepping up trade enforcement requires finding and stopping the cheats and crafting tools that are flexible enough to stop the next round of cheaters. I'll close by saying it's going to take better coordination with Customs and Border Patrol across the U.S. government, from the Department of Labor to the fisheries experts at Commerce. We'll be working with CBP and others to improve our trade laws, make sure these agencies have the tools they need. This morning's hearing is an important first step. We're going to hear from businesses that need inputs and logistics professionals who work with Customs to keep supply chains moving. We'll also hear from folks who work to get forced labor out of the supply chains and an American worker. And I know, Andy, you've worked very closely with us, Mr. Reserve, to tell us how it's personally impacted you through this unfair competition. We want to hear how Customs can maximize enforcement while streamlining imports from trusted traders with clean supply chains. That's going to help U.S. producers the right way, getting the inputs they need, reducing bottlenecks, and helping our workers and consumers. Senator Crapo, look forward to your remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for holding this hearing. It's a very critical issue. And I want to thank you, our witnesses, for appearing before us today. Before I begin, as I begin, I want to mention two things, particularly since this is this committee's first trade hearing of this new Congress. First, I want to welcome Ms. Cindy Allen of FedEx Logistics. She traveled here today from Tennessee, the home of one of our new Finance Committee members, Senator Marsha Blackburn. We're very happy to have you both here. And of course, I'm also glad to see Senators Tillis and Johnson here, who have also just joined the committee, but we're going to have to wait a little bit longer to get some of the fine folks from your states here before the committee. Second, I want to thank Senator Cassidy for his leadership on the issue of customs modernization. He spends a lot of time thinking about how to ensure our custom laws are effectively enforced and how to better harness the data to that effect. We all look forward to hearing his insights as we consider these issues further. Modernizing U.S. custom laws is fast becoming of critical importance. The last comprehensive update to our customs laws occurred exactly 30 years ago. A smart reform now will not only allow us to seize new opportunities, but also to confront the rise of opportunists. Some of those Senator Wyden has already mentioned. Opportunity is out there right now, waiting for the law to catch up with it. The drafters of the last modernization could not possibly foresee the technological tools available to us today, or the sheer number of small businesses that now take advantage of it, international trade, or the benefit to consumers from widespread access to e-commerce. But with any new opportunity, unfortunately, also comes the opportunists. Modernization is imperative to counter both existing threats trying to make their way into this country and those on the horizon. At the El Paso Port of Entry, the brave men and women of the U.S. Customs and Border Protection, or CBP, seized in just the month of January alone over 327 pounds of methamphetamine, 139 pounds of cocaine, and 42 pounds of fentanyl. We've got to close the flow of these drugs over our southern border. On January 29, CBP officers at Chicago's O'Hare seized counterfeit jewelry and apparel that would have been worth over $686,000 if it had been genuine. CBP is also actively enforcing a number of withhold release orders and the Uyghur Forced Labor Implementation Act to keep goods made with forced labor out of this country. The good news about customs modernization is that it's not an either-or proposition when it comes to trade facilitation and trade enforcement. By making smarter use of data collection, we can reduce burdens on both lawful commerce and CBP personnel so that we can better focus resources on enforcement challenges. Let's take an example. Something as simple as importing wet pet food. Importation currently requires the importer to submit data to assist 3 of CBP's partner agencies, USDA, FDA, and the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA. These agencies cumulatively want 54 data elements, but 21 of these elements are redundant, and there are 16 inconsistent definitions for the same data. Under these circumstances, the importer faces the challenge of figuring out what exactly is required, and our law enforcement authorities may end up with information of little utility. We can and must do better, particularly given some of the supply chain bottlenecks we see at our ports. Fortunately, we are well situated to attack the modernization effort today because CBP and its advisory committees started thinking about many of these issues in 2018 when CBP launched its 21st Century Customs Framework Initiative to develop ideas about what a modernized custom regime might look like. Combining CBP's efforts with additional expertise, including that of our witnesses today, we can create an efficient and effective framework. New tools, including automation, can help us identify risks at an early stage. We need a system where contraband never enters the United States in the first place. By catching threats early, we can save CBP from engaging in lengthy investigations on U.S. soil to figure out whether something is a threat or not. A modern system will also expedite lawful commerce to get essential inputs faster into our manufacturers and goods to our consumers. To sum up, smart customs modernization will fight and deter crime, create jobs, move goods faster, and save Americans money, all at the same time. This is precisely the type of work this committee was set up to do, and does well. I look forward to working with my colleagues and the committee on taking that challenge. Now I look forward to hearing from our witnesses and their ideas about how to improve our customs laws. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Crapo, and I think you're spot on in terms of saying that there's enormous bipartisan potential, here. And for those who are following, in the last Congress, when there was gridlock and we went on and on the Senate floor, unable to move, Senator Crapo and I walked into the middle of the Senate chamber, literally in the middle of the two parties, and put together the amendment that got more than 90 votes and freed up the what was really ultimately the CHIPS legislation. And I thank him and look forward to working as we did before on these trade issues. Okay, let me briefly introduce our guests. Ms. Allen, you got a little bit of a send-off already. Note that you're doing good work over there at FedEx on regulatory affairs and compliance. You've been working in this space for 30 years. We already gave Andy Meserve a little bit of a send-off, president of the United Steelworkers, Local 9423 there in Kentucky. We appreciate him. Scott Nova, let's see where Mr. Nova is, the executive director of Worker Rights Consortium, doing good work in terms of monitoring labor rights abuses around the country. John Pickle is with us, senior director of international supply chain policy at the Foreign Trade Council. He's got expertise in a number of issues that are important to us, anti-counterfeiting, for example. And Ms. Brenda Smith is with us as well, global director of government outreach at Expeditors, which does global logistics, and they're in our part of the world, in Seattle, so we welcome her as well. So let's proceed with our witnesses, and we'll begin with you, Ms. Allen.
Chairman Wyden, Ranking Member Crapo, and members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to testify today. My name is Cindy Allen, and I've been working in international trade for 35 years. FedEx believes a connected world is a better world, and at FedEx, trade is our business. Expanding global trade is essential to our customers, our team, and the economy, and modernized trade customs processes are key to that. In the United States, FedEx employs over 412,000 individuals, accounting for nearly 6% of the employees in the U.S. transportation services sector. We play a crucial role in the U.S. supply chain that keeps the country, its people, and the economy moving. We are immensely proud of our global efforts to combat COVID-19 by delivering vaccines and critical PPE. And when the trade disruptions congested our ports, FedEx participated in the White House Supply Chain Disruptions Task Force to get trade moving again. American prosperity is linked to growing markets and greater opportunities for U.S. companies, especially small and medium businesses, which comprise more than 98% of U.S. exports. More than 40 million American jobs depend on trade. With 95% of the world's population and 80% of its purchasing power outside of our borders, global trade will continue to be of critical importance to U.S. economic growth. It's not just exports that benefit the American economy, but imports as well. Nearly 60% of imports are raw materials, capital goods, and industrial products, which are used by U.S. manufacturers and U.S. farmers to produce goods in the U.S. If the U.S. hopes to strengthen its manufacturing base, it must have efficient and reliable access to components from around the world. We must recognize that there has been a sea change in the profile of global trade, however. The global supply chain is more complex and has many more participants by shifting from trade between large multinational corporations to package-based trade between businesses and individual consumers. This shift presents unprecedented opportunities to make global trade more inclusive by enabling small, medium, and sized businesses to participate in the global economy. But it also presents challenges for the government as they grapple with the impact of increased low-value shipments and its impact to their core responsibilities. Against this backdrop, FedEx supports the U.S. government in its efforts to update its customs rules and adapt to a changing trade environment. Given the increased number of trade participants by the government should focus on requiring the right data at the right time from the right party. Appropriate guardrails should be included to prevent unnecessary burdens on companies and supply chains in the name of data collection, especially elements that do not have demonstrated value for targeting or admissibility evaluation purposes. Governments around the world look to the United States for leadership. When considering new requirements on U.S. imports, the U.S. should ask whether U.S. exporters, especially those SMEs, would support the same requirements being placed on their exports by other countries. A truly successful customs modernization needs to be a co-created approach to leverage best practices and to develop feasible joint solutions in a bidirectional manner. In our written testimony, we outlined 7 concepts for consideration. For example, the original Customs Mod Act established the International Trade Data System to act as a single window for all the agencies that delivered. The automated commercial environment did deliver that single window, but it currently has 47 different panes, one for each of the agencies involved in international trade, and the glass is a little bit different in every pane. To truly unify the trade processes, both for the government and for trade, a forum for government-wide policy should be established that looks at processes, procedures, and given the responsibility and the authority to make joint decisions on trade and enforcement purposes. And the trade must have an active role on this forum. Additionally, shipments have a history when they arrive at the border. Government agencies have expressed interest in receiving critical data associated with these shipments and parties to the transactions to better inform their admissibility decisions. We propose an iterative or progressive filing be developed to allow the right party with the right data at the right time to provide that data much earlier in the supply chain, which should be linked to trusted trader benefits. Lastly, FedEx would like to highlight the importance of a current feature of the U.S. customs laws that facilitate trade, the United States strong de minimis provision. De minimis is a longstanding feature of the United States import system. Congress looked at this issue most recently in 2016 via the Trade Facilitation and Trade Enforcement Act, which explains the higher de minimis value threshold provides significant economic benefits to businesses and customers in the U.S. and the economy of the U.S. And it's important to note that CBP has the same, if not more, opportunity to review, screen, examine, and seize shipments in the de minimis environment as they do every other shipment into the United States. Additionally, in the express environment, we've dedicated individuals that work side by side with in partnership with CBP and other government agencies to identify and eliminate goods in violation of these laws. We'd love to invite the committee, the chairman, the ranking member to visit the Memphis airport and visit our World Hub to see this in action. Thank you for inviting me, and I look forward to our discussion today. Thank you.
Ms. Allen, thank you. Let's go next to Mr. Meserve.
Hello. Thank you, Chairman Wyden and Ranking Member Crapo, for the invitation. Thank you, members. So thank you for the opportunity to testify today on modernizing our trade laws and improving our country's trade enforcement. My name is Andy Meserve, and I am a union president of United Steelworkers Local 9423. My local represents workers at Century Aluminum, Hallsville, Kentucky Smelter, located on the Ohio River. Our plant is one of 6 remaining primary aluminum smelters in the United States, which, when operating, employs around 650 union and management workers, making up to 250,000 tons of primary aluminum a year. I'm a maintenance mechanic by trade, meaning that I am responsible for ensuring everything from conveyor belts to cranes operating safely in the manufacturing process that turns raw materials into primary aluminum. My job is to not just fix the immediate problem, but to do preventive maintenance and find root causes to any breakdowns, making recommendations to management on how to solve the problems long term. In some ways, you are all managers of our country's economic well-being, so I hope that my testimony today will highlight the immediate problems facing our smelter, but also make long-term recommendations to ensure the competitive U.S. primary aluminum industry, which is critical to our national security. If you Google Hallsville, Kentucky Smelter, the first thing that comes up are articles that highlight high energy prices that temporarily idled my smelter, throwing over 600 workers in economic uncertainty. To me, that is like looking at a broken conveyor and not asking what caused that failure. Yes, energy prices are a factor in our current plant idling, but we need to step back and see if we can set conditions for success in long-term operations. Aluminum is a globally traded commodity in an energy-intensive, trade-exposed industry. The policies, decisions you all make in trade will impact whether we have a domestic aluminum industry or not, just as much as regional power prices. My immediate recommendation to you are that we update our trade enforcement laws and quickly respond to illegal trade practices, but put in place trade rules that better account for worker abuses and environmental pollutions, and ensure that we prioritize Customs and Border Patrol efforts to collect duties and stop illegal goods at the border. Regarding trade enforcement, the USW has supported a bill which passed the House of Representatives last Congress and was led by Senator Brown, led in the Senate by Senator Brown and former Senator Portman, commonly known as the Level the Playing Field Act 2.0. The legislation would have provided a number of trade law updates that would give new tools to U.S. workers and manufacturers to fend off illegal dumping and subsidized goods. We urge Financial Committee to take up that bill this Congress and pass it as soon as possible. Another enforcement action we could take today is stopping Russian aluminum imports into the U.S. It is hard for me to sit here at this table and not be angry we allow Russian aluminum imports to enter our country while 500 of my brothers and sisters and fellow Americans are out of work who could make the same product. The USW supports every effort to eliminate Russian aluminum products from entering our market. The union sees value in placing tariffs on Russian aluminum products, but we would be more effective to sanction or place a total ban on downstream products that have Russian smelted and cast primary aluminum in the supply chain. Congress must also do everything it can to limit forced labor goods and goods made in countries that prohibit free and independent unions from entering our market. My written testimony goes into detail on how forced labor practices in China affect the global aluminum supply chain. This must stop. We should be making primary aluminum here and not allowing traders to hide behind outdated contracting policies which allow forced labor goods into globally traded commodities. My union has prepared a number of other recommendations to better account for dumping and subsidized goods. Sufficient work and my union dollars have gone into that effort. I support those recommendations and ask that you act swiftly on them. I do this not just for my union brothers and sisters at my local, but also to ensure a better, more democratic global market. I look forward to answering your questions Thank you for my time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Meserve, and we know this is a particularly challenging time for workers. I mean, you're trying to come out of the pandemic, you're dealing with supply chains, and then you're bumping up against these unfair trade practices like forced labor and the kinds of things you've outlined. And we want to come up with some policies that give workers more of a chance to get a fair shake, and we appreciate it. Okay, Mr. Nova.
Chairman Wyden, Ranking Member Crapo, thank you for the opportunity to testify. My name is Scott Nova. I'm Executive Director of the Worker Rights Consortium, an organization that monitors working conditions in global manufacturing supply chains and promotes respect for worker rights. We're a member of the Coalition to End Forced Labor in the Uyghur region. I'll address the enforcement of the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act and Section 307 of the Tariff Act. The removal of the consumptive demand exception from Section 307 and the enactment of the UFLPA are rare elements of U.S. trade policy that constrain the ability of corporations to produce goods under abusive and unlawful conditions overseas and sell them in the United States. These laws are of immense importance to vast numbers of workers and a major step toward fair competition in the global economy. Strong enforcement is crucial. Most corporations will not, of their own volition, respond adequately to the risk of forced labor in their supply chains, even in circumstances as horrific as those we have witnessed in the Uyghur region. That is why the UFLPA was necessary. In assessing UFLPA enforcement, we are mindful that the law is prodigious in scope and the task facing the enforcement agencies daunting. Branch and Congress. In effect, there are in a growing list of industries. Reporters know they face unprecedented scrutiny. Many, though by no means all, major apparel brands have exited or are exiting the Uyghur region. Demand for Xinjiang cotton is plummeting. There are also reasons for concern. Customs and Border Protection is not reporting adequately on enforcement. For example, the data CBP publishes on its most important enforcement actions, stopping shipments with content from the Uyghur region, lumps all relevant data points into a single statistic, the number of shipments or entries identified for further examination. The statistic is so broad as to be meaningless. We do not know, for example, what percentage of the shipments CBP examines are detained versus allowed into the U.S. Solar is a priority under the law, but CBP does not publish sufficient data for the public to know if its enforcement effort reflects that. Not only is there no disaggregation of the data by industry, much less disclosure of which specific importers are trying to bring in banned goods, CBP does not report which countries targeted goods are coming from. Addressing industry. As researchers, if you bought a car, it contains parts. The UFLPA are the keys to ensuring that your 2024 Toyota or Ford does not. Your letter to auto executives, Chairman Wyden, was an important wake-up call for the industry. Insufficient forced labor reporting by CBP is not a new problem. It dates back to the Section 307 enforcement push that began in 2016. Accountability depends on reasonable transparency. It is important to the enforcement of the UFLPA and Section 307 that CBP provide more and more informative data. The UFLPA mandates that the government maintain a list of suppliers implicated in Uyghur forced labor so their products can't enter the U.S. The list contains only 20 companies and has not been expanded since June. The decision to add a company must be made carefully and in a time frame that allows the list to serve its purpose. Independent researchers have identified hundreds of candidates. It is important that the Forced Labor Enforcement Task Force, which manages the list, act expeditiously to add companies that deserve to be included. State suggest too much emphasis to the U.S. Disproportionate resources. To put this in perspective, direct U.S. imports from the Uyghur region before UFLPA were $300 million per year. The U.S. will import twice that volume of goods from all other sources just during the time it takes to complete this hearing. Addressing this set of issues, hopefully with expanded resources from Congress, will strengthen a UFLPA enforcement effort already having an unprecedented impact. I'll conclude by offering two observations on broader enforcement of Section 307. First, While customs modernization is a worthy objective, it is vital to ensure that it strengthens and expedites forced labor enforcement. Among the modifications to avoid would be adding layers to the withhold release order process that would give importers violating the law new tools to delay enforcement. Second, if we want corporations to exercise due diligence on forced labor, we need to enforce the law. The reason corporations fail at due diligence is not because they can't figure out how to do it, but because it costs money to do it right, including to suppliers commensurate. The concept of importing goods made with corporations, enforcement of sex high will see due diligence.
Good morning, Chair. Committee. Opportunity to discuss. I'm John Pickle, the Senior Director of International Supply Chain Policy at the National Foreign Trade Council, or NFTC. The views expressed today are mine and on behalf of NFTC, not representing any previous employer or specific company. Trade supports 40 million jobs and increases the purchasing power of households by $18,000 annually. The U.S. customs system has been tested by recent disruptions, but still provides a firm base for American companies to supply families and businesses with the products that they need. Customs modernization proposals should encompass the following principles. 1, balanced trade facilitation and enforcement. Effective compliance can be done in a way that facilitates legitimate trade. Well-defined consider impact on trade, promote similar balance across government agencies. 2, clarify responsibilities of actors throughout the process. As trade models shift, government and industry need to set clear expectations and maintain flexibility, particularly to ensure that the correct information is being collected from the right party at the right point in the process. 3, promote partnership between government and industry. Partnership constructs need to be updated to promote voluntary information sharing that addresses compliance actions earlier in the supply chain and improves efficiency of enforcement. 4, embrace automation to simplify the processing of cargo. Automation improves efficiency, but is reliant upon inputs from various actors, which can be onerous on small businesses. So required information should be available and relevant in addressing critical visibility gaps. 5, apply trusted trader principles to address emerging risk factors. Current trusted trader programs were developed in partnership with private industry and should adapt to meet emerging demands through the same spirit of collaboration and trust and provide meaningful benefits aligned with the cost of participation. Improving the efficiency of the trade processes promotes product availability and increases purchasing powers for families and businesses. Third Wave found that improved facilitation in the following areas could create almost 1 million American jobs. First, simplifying border processes ensures predictability of rules, fees, and processes. Second, embracing digitization has saved the government $1.75 billion and many hours for industry. This system should ensure government-wide participation and a process with resources to improve functionality. Third, focus on speed and security through risk management prioritization with meaningful de minimis and informal entry policies to provide quick and compliant clearance. Congress ensured that over 1 billion annual shipments to families and businesses would not be subject to taxes and administrative burden by increasing the de minimis threshold in 2016. These shipments are subject to trade laws and largely compliant. De minimis treatment of low-value goods reduce costs, but eroding this policy would be a regressive tax that disproportionately impacts low-income households and diverts resources from current enforcement priorities. There is no place for forced labor in American supply chains, period. American companies continue to shift sourcing away from regions of concern and would like to work with CBP to further compliance efforts through testing supply chain tracing technologies and anticipate detention prioritizations under the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act. As we address visibility gaps in complex supply chains, the trade community craves predictability and clear due diligence standards to structure sincere compliance efforts. Engagement with partner governments should address the root causes of forced labor, including recruitment practices and governance around existing laws related to forced labor. In closing, I'd like to emphasize that the world will be watching how the U.S. seizes the leadership opportunities discussed here today. Commitment to trade facilitation through open, rules-based trading is a standard that we should be exporting to our trading partners. Thank you for your attention to these important topics, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pickle. Ms. Smith.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Crapo, and members of the committee, thank you for the chance to testify before you today. My name is Brenda Smith, and I currently work as the Global Director of Government Outreach for Expeditors International of Washington, a global logistics, freight forwarding, and information company. Previously, I served for 7 years as the Executive Assistant Commissioner for Trade at U.S. Customs and Border Protection. The views I express this morning are my own and do not necessarily reflect the position of my current or past employer. The pandemic laid bare the weaknesses in a global system that moves goods from farmers and manufacturers to consumers. In the 40 years that I have worked in this arena, the volume of global trade has multiplied 32 times what it was in the mid-1980s. This staggering growth has been accompanied by an overlay of new trade agreements, expanded supply chain parties, and increased consumer expectations. Customs administrations have also evolved over those same 40 years, mostly in response to border security challenges, leaving many trade modernization efforts unfinished. In my work on the U.S. single window, I learned the importance of developing a clear vision and then translating this vision into legal, operational, and technology frameworks. My own statement of principles underlying such a vision would include the following things. First, leveraging trusted trader investment to share risk information and truly streamline entry and compliance procedures by all regulatory agencies. Make the green lane a priority and a reality across all types of shipments and all trade processes. This approach should extend to expansion and full implementation of AEO mutual recognition agreements. Second, truly digitizing agency requirements for supply chains, including a continued commitment to the U.S. single window and a full rationalization of data requirements to minimize redundancy and focus on collecting only the most important data at the right time from the right party. More data isn't always better. Quality is more important than quantity. Third, planning and practicing a response to supply chain disruptions across all government agencies and their supply chain partners. Resiliency will be greater if potential regulatory and operational flexibilities are determined in advance and recognize the lower risk associated with trusted traders. And fourth and finally, a single process across all government agencies with requirements for good crossing borders, to include the alignment of their regulations, operational processes, and trusted trader programs, and a commitment to using only the single window for the collection of data. What will it take to implement this vision? There are many things that could be included, but I'd like to highlight two specific areas. First, an investment in customs personnel and technology, and second, collaboration with stakeholders. First, implementation will require ongoing investment in the softer parts of customs infrastructure, specifically expertise and technology. Aside from significant investment in forced labor capabilities, the level of CBP's non-uniformed trade personnel has not materially increased since CBP was founded in 2003. In addition to ensuring that there are enough specialists to handle the growth in trade and complexity, these individuals need to be well-trained in both modern business practice and traditional customs competencies, with a dedicated trade and cargo academy and regularly updated curriculum. Today's emerging technologies can support greater supply chain visibility and a targeted risk management approach that facilitates trade and improves revenue collection, compliance, and security in ways not possible even 5 years ago. The second key requirement for modernization is collaboration with stakeholders. I worked extensively with the trade community and valued forums that allowed frank discussion and consensus building among trade stakeholders. expanding private sector engagement with the partner government agencies through the Border Interagency Executive Council, and driving more active regulatory, operational, and technology coordination through forums like the COAC, the Trade Support Network, and the BIC would result in better problem solving and a trade environment that meets the needs of both government and the private sector. I thank this committee for the opportunity to advocate for customs modernization. Much work remains to be done, but I strongly believe that it is worth pursuing as we support opportunities for businesses and consumers as they engage in the global marketplace.
Thank you very much, and all of you have been excellent. I'll start with you, Mr. Meserve. I was reading your statement last night in the wee hours, and I thought you really hit it strongly, how aluminum made with Uyghur forced labor gets into the global supply chains, and you describe how companies in China take advantage of slave labor, and then they undercut their competitors with the environmental laws, and then you were really specific about how multiple Uyghur region producers make primary aluminum. And that's your facility in Kentucky. You know, that's the ball game. Uyghur-made aluminum goes into Chinese auto parts and ends up in the International Metals Training Platform. So here's my question, because this gets pretty complicated and all the rest. It seems to me you've really given us a very eloquent statement, a very good statement, saying all you all want, all the workers want, is a more level playing field, that you can beat the pants off competition as long as you get close to a level playing field. Is that a fair assessment of what you're trying to make sure up here we got in the Senate?
That's correct. We make primary labor. We can do it well.
Let's get your microphone on there.
Is it on now?
Perfect.
Okay. Well, thank you for the question. Yes, we have, 520 well-trained steelworkers in Kentucky that can make primary aluminum. We can do it well. We can compete with anybody in the world as long as we're given the opportunity. And like I said, a level playing field with market power that's accessible, and people aren't flooding the market with goods, driving the prices down or manipulating the LME.
You tell the members of your union that we thought you were a little logical for Washington, D.C., but you said it really well, and that's what we're committed to doing. Senator Crapo and I have been working on this for some time, get you a more level playing field, because this is a private economy, markets, and we know you can win in those markets. We'll just get you a level playing field, and I thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Nova, so our investigations team learned about these allegations of troubling practices in the auto sector. The key auto inputs, steel, aluminum, copper, they're increasingly made in the Uyghur region. Documented ties to forced labor. We are reviewing the answers we've gotten from the companies. I'll have more to say as we get a chance to have a more thorough analysis. My initial take is they've got a lot more work to do. And we're going to be following up and looking at the entire automotive supply chain. And my question to you is, you've been working with these companies to eliminate forced labor. What would be your counsel to the automobile companies? What should they be doing to ensure that we get this, forced labor scourge and the products associated with it out of the supply chains?
Right. Well, in the broadest sense, they need to take all the steps necessary to ensure that none of the inputs that end up in their vehicles are coming from the Uyghur region or from any producer elsewhere in China participating in the scheme whereby the Chinese government forcibly transfers Uyghur laborers to other parts of the country to work under forced labor conditions. More specifically, the first step is to know where the inputs are coming from. And I say that wanting to be clear that these corporations could have and already should have known where these inputs are coming from.
Let me make sure we understand that. They should have known already.
Should have known. Sometimes corporations, including auto companies, will act as if the origins of the inputs that go into their cars are some kind of unfathomable mystery. But the reality is they have the ability and the power to know where every single element comes from. If they don't know, it's not because the information is unknowable, but because they have not prioritized gaining and maintaining that knowledge. So they need to start there. They need to know where the aluminum comes from. They need to know where the other raw materials come from. They need to know where every element comes from.
All right. One last question, if I might. Mr. Pickle, for you on this fentanyl issue. This is the single deadliest drug threat that our country has encountered. The deaths just keep going through the stratosphere. Nearly 70,000 in 2021. Definitely has hit Oregon very, very hard. Last month, Oregon Live reported a massive drug bust near Salem, uncovering 45,000 fentanyl pills. Worse yet, these were counterfeit pills, fentanyl masquerading as oxycodone. So no one knew that one pill, just one pill, could kill him. And we're hearing constantly from families who've lost kids too early, and no community is safe. And we've been very concerned about Customs' role here and believe more needs to be done. You worked on the STOP Act implementation at Customs, which provided Customs more advanced information on air shipments and better risk analysis and the like. I again think that there's a lot more that needs to be done. I mean, I just described to you last month in my state. This is not, somewhere else, thousands of miles away. My state, 45,000 fentanyl pills. So what else do you think this committee ought to be doing to beef up the enforcement effort to deal with this scourge?
Senator, thanks for the question. I think it's this is the availability of fentanyl is certainly an ongoing issue, and I think a small sort of silver lining may be that, with passage of the STOP Act and enactment of the requirements that you referenced, there have been shifts in how fentanyl comes to the United States that have been well documented in the press. And I'm obviously not here representing CBP, and they may have additional thoughts on this, but what I would offer is that data sharing capabilities, particularly with foreign postal operators, provides very valuable insight to enable enforcement actions. Do
you think we ought to be pushing foreign postal operators to be working more closely with us?
I think that this committee and the U.S. government should work with those foreign postal operators to understand what information is important to target in on that particular risk. That may shift over time. So developing a dynamic framework for shifting what data is available would be very beneficial in an enforcement posture.
I'm way over my time. Senator Crapo.
Well, thank you, Senator Wyden, and I'm going to follow up on that exactly. I have been meeting with the sheriffs in Idaho across my state because of the very same crisis that's happening in Idaho that Senator Wyden talked about in Oregon. In fact, one of my sheriffs said to me, every state is a border state in the context of fentanyl because it's coming into every single state in massive amounts and in massive ways. So I believe this is one of the key issues we need to address as a specific risk that comes from our border protection. You just indicated, Mr. Pickle, that the STOP Act and some of the other things that have already been done have shifted a little bit about, or at least maybe improved our understanding about how and where it's coming across the border. I know that at one point there was, and today still, there is still a lot of argument about that. There are those who say that most of it comes through the ports or the ports of entry. And others say it's just coming across the border because of the virtual free flow of illegal entry across the border. Could you give any of your insight on that?
Sure. Yes, thank you, Senator. So the movement of narcotics through ports is a much more controlled environment to be able to address enforcement actions and deploy technologies that can detect these substances more readily. So pushing those movements into that environment do improve the enforcement efficiencies significantly. I can't speak to the current flows as I'm not in the government anymore. But what I would say is that the sharing of information and identifying risk factors earlier in the context of supply chain movements will certainly impact the improvement of compliance in that area.
All right, thank you. Do any of the other witnesses have knowledge or expertise you could share with us on this issue? All right, thank you. Then I'll move on. Ms. Allen, you intrigued me, your testimony intrigued me when you talked about how what we intended to be a single window actually has 47 different window panes, and they are of different types of glass, so to speak. Could you elaborate on that a little bit? I think that it's probably something that most Americans can intuitively understand in terms of a description of bureaucracy. But would you please elaborate on that a little bit and tell us how maybe we could fix that?
Yeah, thank you, Ranking Member. I was also glad to hear in your comments you mentioned the multiple streams of data that have to be filed, the same data element, and the different definitions and terms that are used in different agencies. I'd like to point to the definition of agent. In a review of all of the 47 different agencies that have both authority to stop goods and have jurisdiction over imports and exports, the term agent is littered throughout, and there are 10+ different definitions of agent. And you can imagine, I as a trader, a trusted trader with the U.S. government, am trying to file that data, so I'm not sure how I'm acting at that particular moment. Am I an agent by the definition of FDA? Am I an agent of the USDA? Am I an agent of Customs and Border Protection? So really looking at those common definitions in the regulations and streamlining those will help facilitate legal and lawful trade. Most companies want to be compliant with the law, but it's very complicated. You know, that's why Ms. Smith and I have jobs to make sure that we're assisting that trade facilitation. There's a couple of things beyond that we can do. One is ensuring that the information that goes into that single window actually goes through the window. Right now we have agencies that have built systems outside of that single window that I, as a customs broker, have to file data through to get release of the cargo. And then I have to repeat that process within the single window. So we'd like to have one true single window as it was intended in the Modernization Act as it was first passed. The other thing is the policy, procedures, and processes. Every agency has their own jurisdiction. They're authorized by different congressional committees to carry out that work and have their own sets of laws and regulations that they must comply with, and we understand that. However, as a participant in international trade, we would like one body, one forum to go to really understand what I need to do to be compliant. What do I need to do as a trader to meet all those different regulations and truly provide that single window experience so that we have an understanding of what is needed to facilitate the trade.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the information you provided us and the advice that you've given us on that issue. I think we do need to fix it. Thank you.
I certainly share your views, Senator Crapo. Our next two senators will be Senator Carper and then Senator Cornyn.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, everybody. Nice to see you. Thanks for your presence and your input today. Last Congress, I introduced legislation along with Senator Cornyn, Senators Menendez, and Tim Scott, all members of this committee, and it's called the Customs Trade Partnership Against Terrorism Pilot Program Act. It has an acronym, as you know. I hate acronyms. And I'm inclined not to use one in this case, but it was approved, I think, unanimously by both the Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee, on which I serve, and it was approved by the full Senate, as you may recall. Our bill would expand a successful program within the Customs and Border Protection Agency that I'd like to think of as kind of like as a TSA pre-check TSA PreCheck, but for goods instead of for people. A question, if I could, for Mr. Pickle. I love your name. I don't know if anybody's told you that today. Makes me smile when I say it. So. But and Ms. Smith, I love your name too, ma'am. In your experience, for both of you, what expanding programs like the one that we're talking about here today, the Customs Trade Partnership Against Terrorism Pilot Program, improve the efficiency and security of our supply chains, and what other measures should we consider here in Congress in order to modernize the screening of goods at our borders? All right. Mr. Pickle, you want to go first? Sure. I just want to say your name again.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. I would say any effort to expand the participation in the CTPAT, I'll use the acronym, partnership participants would be helpful, so long as those participants do have full control of their supply chain. They would need to meet those requirements and understand the limitations of what exists within their business models. I would say that an important part of reconsidering the role of CTPAT would be how can that cadre of willing experts in industry be used to tackle new and emerging risks in the customs space, and also, how can we look at the value that businesses are getting within their business models, because it does require significant resources to participate in these programs.
All right, thanks. Ms. Smith, any thoughts?
Thank you. My name isn't quite as interesting as my colleagues, but
well, you have a boot on your foot, on your right foot.
I do.
It just. Are you okay?
I am. Thank you, sir.
I used to wear one of those.
It's a terrible thing.
I broke my foot running a half marathon.
All right.
On the first mile.
I don't have as good a story.
Oh, but it ended well.
Thank you. I think we have an opportunity to take a look at how we use trusted traders, whether it's the CTPAT program or the Authorized Economic Operator program around the world, and really look at the process that we use to facilitate low-risk trade. By and large, the members of partnership programs are meeting a very high standard for security and for trade compliance. And I think we could take a look at the process using a managing by account approach, provide more data upfront or data upfront, and let the individual transactions, the individual shipments, which are relatively low risk, flow through. I think that would set a standard, an international standard, and then we can use that for our businesses around the world through mutual recognition agreements.
All right, thanks for that. One last question. I get back to you, Mr. Pickle. There's been discussion about the pros and cons of the de minimis program, but I want to focus on one specific quirk of the program related to the foreign trade zones. Every state in our country has at least one foreign trade zone, as you know, and Delaware's no exception to that. Currently, goods entering the U.S. from other countries are eligible to use the de minimis provision. However, goods imported through the U.S.-based foreign trade zones into the U.S. markets are not. I'm concerned that this disparate treatment may have unintended consequences, such as giving foreign distributors a cost advantage over distributors located in the U.S. foreign trade zones, and this may in turn incentivize e-commerce operations to be located offshore rather than in U.S.-based foreign trade zones that employ American workers. Quick question. In your experience, how do you think that U.S. companies would benefit if they could take advantage of de minimis when they import goods through foreign trade zones? Just briefly.
U.S. companies would benefit from the use of de minimis thresholds being applied to entries through foreign trade zones. I would say that we would want to work closely with you to make sure that that's done in a precise way that doesn't have unintended consequences.
All right, fair enough. Thank you. Thank you for your brevity. There you go. And for your testimony.
Senator Carper, Senator Cornyn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Smith, maybe I'll start with you. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act contained about $3.8 billion for CBP, including $450 million directly appropriated to CBP and another $3 billion for the General Services Administration that can be used for port of entry modernization. Would you comment on the current state of those facilities, that infrastructure, that technology, and what additional investments or what additional things that the United States government should do to facilitate the flow of legitimate trade and commerce across our border? Southern border is what I'm thinking about, obviously, coming from Texas.
Yes, sir. Thank you for the question. I think we have a tremendous tremendous opportunity with a huge investment in our physical infrastructure. 2 points I would make. One, many of the ports of entry are constrained by their physical footprint. They just don't have room to grow. I do believe, as I mentioned in my testimony, we have an opportunity to think about what a green lane looks like to facilitate low-risk trade. And so as
green lane means you wave it on through.
Wave
right?
it on through. We have good partners, compliant partners, low-risk trade. We have the technology. Let's apply it to build a process that supports a green lane. The second thing I would note is that, as I mentioned in my testimony, physical infrastructure isn't the only thing we need for a process. The technology and the expertise of the customs personnel are as critical, I believe, as physical infrastructure.
Well, of course, I'm very familiar with the men and women in blue who work at our ports of entry along the southern border between Mexico and Texas. And, you know, frequently when we talk about Mexico, we talk about our southern border, I will hear people say we should seal the border, which, if you come from Texas, strikes me as very odd. And I guess if you think about it, it's pretty odd because Mexico is our single largest trading partner. And U.S. companies amount to more than half of Mexico's foreign investment. So, Ms. Allen, I imagine FedEx does a lot of business in Mexico. Is that correct?
Yes, we do business in 220 countries around the world, so we definitely have a presence in Mexico and have a robust business in Texas, actually operating foreign trade zones in Texas, which we support very heavily.
Me too. Well, I know FedEx has a big portfolio, but just focusing now on Mexico, I remember when China became fashionable because of the low cost for manufacturing in China, and a lot of manufacturing moved from Mexico to China. Now we're seeing a reversal of that because of concerns about supply chains and because of the rising hostility of the Chinese Communist Party. And now we're looking for friendshoring or other friendly places where we can secure those supply chains. And Mexico, given the fact that they're already a major trading partner of the United States, would seem like a logical place for those manufacturing facilities to land as part of that friendshoring. There also strikes me as other benefits to the United States just because we are tied, our economies and our countries are tied together by a common border, and anything we can do to help Mexico help itself and prosper and create jobs and economic opportunity would take a lot of pressure, I think, off of the border itself in terms of illegal migration, but also would benefit the United States through increased trading opportunities. Would you share some thoughts on that topic?
Firstly, I'll say, we are very in favor of trade across the southern border. Our FedEx jobs, we say all of our jobs are trade jobs. Almost 600,000 individuals around the world, they are part of trade. So we have a presence in Mexico. I share Ms. Smith's opinion that the infrastructure is a challenge on the southern border, as well as staffing. We support additional staffing at the ports. We've found in our experience that additional staffing given to those ports of entry have better outcomes and facilitate trade in a much more efficient manner. I also believe that, that bidirectional education that happens between trade and CBP is a good thing. We do meet with our CBP colleagues and the Mexican customs authorities to ensure that we have good working relationships to facilitate trade and share best practices and ideas across that border every chance we get.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Cornyn. Next is Senator Tillis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, when I came in 2015, I never did a maiden speech, but I thought that maybe for this hearing, this will be kind of a replacement for it.
All right.
For you all, I thank you for being here, Ms. Allen. FedEx was a client of mine back in the 1980s. I spent a lot of time in Memphis, and every time I was there, I spent a lot of time at Rendezvous, too, getting some good ribs. Mr. Pickle, I know your name's not spelled exactly right, but when you get a chance, you ought to take a trip to Mount Olive, center of the pickle universe, and Mount Olive pickles. And to the other witnesses, thank you all. My family has a proud tradition of labor membership. I have a brother-in-law who started at Fruit Growers Express and retired from CSX, and another brother-in-law who just recently retired from CSX, and other families. And Mr. Pickle, I spent about 10 years of my career as a partner at Price Waterhouse in global supply chain management, strategic sourcing, offshoring when we had to. And I think we have a great opportunity ahead of us. I've heard a lot of great ideas from members here on this committee, and I do think the focus needs to be on China. There are other bad actors. Actually, we have allies who are bad actors. But I hope that we can have a broader view. I'll give you an idea of how I think we need to go against China and have them notice a whole of government, a whole of Congress approach across many committee jurisdictions. Last week, I met with the DEA, and the transnational criminal organizations have completely changed the game on how they launder money. They don't go to semi-sophisticated people carrying cash around. They go to a global network of banking entities that are moving across this globe and laundering billions of dollars, known entities that the DEA knows. We need to be able to track them down, and we can do that in the Banking Committee, maybe here in Finance. I have two companies headquartered in North Carolina, Nucor Steel, which is not a union shop, but a very well-regarded steel producer, that are being ripped off every single day of the year for the last decades. And I've seen some of our partners have bad behavior in dumping illegal steel here in this country. Charlotte Pipe, Mr. Chairman, is a family-owned business in downtown Charlotte that has a very sophisticated business but still maintains its old-time foundry image. You can go to a province in China, and they have like a Hollywood movie set. It looks just like Charlotte Pipe. It's called Charlotte Pipe. They print Charlotte Pipe on it, and they dump it in this country and other countries. They're one of the biggest producers of pipes in the United States. But I think we need to let China know we know what they're doing. I have a friend, Enes Kanter Freedom. He was an NBA standout who basically got fired by the NBA because he stood up against the issue of human rights against the Uyghurs. We need to let them know that they are benefiting from literally slave labor and forced imprisonment. We need to let them know that they are exploiting our financial system. We need to let them know that they're making it unfair for union labor to actually compete on a level playing field. Can we get all of the links in the supply chain back? Absolutely not. And even if we could, we may want to think strategically about countries that we do want to have strong trading partners with, especially in this hemisphere. We need to make sure that we have 4 or 5 green lanes coming across all of our land ports of entry in Mexico to increase commercial traffic there and to get them through here, but also know that China is sending precursors to Mexico and poisoning hundreds of thousands of people across the globe and killing about 100,000 people from opioids, fentanyl. We need to let them know we know this. And the best way we can do that is have a coordinated effort with the House and the Senate and the committees of jurisdiction to say, we got you. We're going to match you on trade, we're going to compete fairly, and we're going to move supply chain links out of China to countries we can rely on. And we can't forget how we saw those supply chains break down with COVID. So I think that this is a great opportunity, and I believe that there's a huge bipartisan base of people here to vote on it. If we have the hearings and we have the markups, we can send a message to China that's going to benefit the free world, and it's going to benefit free markets. So you all can count me in. We'll make sure that we're in touch with you all. You can count me in on listening to your priorities, because many of everything I heard in your opening testimony was spot on. Count me in to help. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
That was some kind of maiden speech. I'm telling you.
2 seconds over.
Well said, Senator Tillis. And for all our guests, you really heard just now a capsulized summary of what this is all about, and particularly the call for some bipartisanship. We've got a vote on. I understand our friend from Indiana has voted, so what I'm going to do is turn this over to him.
Yes.
And then I'm going to try and get back as quickly as possible. We've got a list of colleagues who may be coming in and out, and I thank Senator, my friend. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Chairman. Appreciate your leadership. And I want to thank our witnesses for your willingness to appear here today, offer your words of wisdom, and share some knowledge about what can be a really complex issue. Ms. Allen, thank you in particular. We are so grateful for the significant presence that FedEx has throughout the state of Indiana. In particular, your massive facility in the Indianapolis area. It is an amazing city within a city that lights up at night and is processing so many shipments as FedEx generally does every day. To be exact, 16 million shipments are processed each day. It blows the mind. But a lot of Hoosier jobs depend and will depend as we look into the future on our trade system working effectively, reducing friction where we can, optimizing the systems, all the boring stuff of government that really, really matters to rank and file Hoosiers. So they delegated to me to try and sort some of this out and improve what we're doing, keep doing what doesn't need to be improved. Ms. Allen, can you explain how the international express shipping process works at major facilities like FedEx's Indianapolis hub? And then I'll give you an opportunity momentarily to tell us about the policy changes that have been discussed here today and which ones matter most to you.
Thank you, Senator. And I have to say I grew up in Indiana. I actually grew up in Plainfield, Indiana, which abuts the airport, and my high school boyfriend's farm is now the FedEx hub facility there, so near and dear to my heart, and love getting back there.
Well, he'll be able to see on YouTube now.
That's right, that's right. So the process of getting shipments in, we take information in from multiple sources.
Yeah.
Anyone can ship anything anywhere now, and getting that information into the systems at the foreign port is really critical. They put in that raw information, and we share that information with the government. We want to make sure that the government, specifically CBP, has an opportunity to understand what's coming in the country, from who, how it's transiting into the U.S., and when it arrives here, then there's another transmission of information on the manifest. So there's a robust amount of information for every shipment, regardless of value, as it comes into the United States. We then file additional information with CBP once the goods are 24 hours out, requesting a release. And that means we're telling them this is a formal shipment, it's over $2,500, or it's a de minimis shipment, it's under $800, and file a few more data elements. I think it's important to note that the data between a de minimis shipment that's under $800 and a shipment that's over $800 is just a few data elements for release purposes. So CBP has the opportunity and the information available to make good targeting decisions. And in the case of FedEx, we have customs on site in our facilities, and we work hand in glove with them to make sure that they have the information and the access to the cargo that they need to to make those seizures, to identify concerning or illicit products. We work with them, work with other intelligence agencies as well. We welcome them into our facilities because really there is no place in our network for illegal or illicit substances, and we try to do everything we can to work with law enforcement to make sure that that is eradicated from our system. So thank you.
Well, you've gone exactly where I wanted you to go. You've painted a picture of a number of forms and processes and activities which are essential to your work and ensuring that we work together to catch those violations like drug trafficking or Chinese counterfeits. And we want to be careful, but we want to be bold as we implement policy changes. So would some of the policy changes expressed here today improve the process you've laid out? If so, how? And if they'll create challenges, if there are certain ones that just you have great concerns about, if you could vocalize that to me, that would be appreciated.
I think we have great opportunity before us with the customs modernization. You know, our written testimony outlines 7 high-level concepts that we think are great opportunities to marry enforcement activities with trade facilitation for legal and lawful importers. You know, the trusted trader system, you know, has mainly offered benefits in the security and physical areas. We'd like to see that expanded from a compliance perspective, and we think there's an opportunity to do so. CBP and other government agencies have outlined that they would like additional data earlier in that process. They want an ability to have access to the data that's there. They want to offer companies who want to have a trusted trader status file that information in an iterative manner as it's transiting through that process that I just spoke about, and even before it even becomes a shipment, back to the source materials. This has a couple of benefits for CBP from an enforcement perspective, but also for the trade. If I'm filing information all the way back to where that aluminum was actually produced, I can prove that I have no forced labor in the supply chain. And similarly, for trade agreements, if I understand and can demonstrate through that filing that the origin of those goods, it's an automatic qualification for free trade agreements, which is an onerous process today to actually qualify those goods. So I think there's opportunities for both facilitation married with that enforcement activity by the delivery of trusted trader benefits. Not everyone is going to be able to do that, specifically small and medium enterprises. We help our SMEs a lot because this is not their business. They don't know the international laws, and they rely on companies like FedEx to help them navigate that process. So I think that you'll find that larger companies who do want to do the right thing will participate in that, and we'll help our SMEs participate in that trade process moving forward.
Thank you, Ms. Allen. I'm over time, and I'm sure my colleagues will have some thoughtful follow-ups. And I continue to rediscover the importance of seniority in this institution. So will my senior and distinguished colleague from Idaho take the con, as we say in the Navy?
Thank you very much, Senator Young, and we'll turn it right over to Senator Thune.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks for having the hearing today on customs modernization. I want to welcome all of the witnesses. In 2015, I led a trade provision with my colleague, Senator Wyden, which was included in the Trade Facilitation and Trade Enforcement Act, which was the last major customs bill, and that particular provision updated the de minimis threshold for imports from $200 for products to $800. The idea behind the update was to reduce trade barriers and allow more low-value items to be imported into the country duty-free and with fewer unnecessary administrative requirements. Ms. Allen, your written testimony, you state that the current de minimis provision streamlines trade and benefits American consumers, small and large businesses, e-commerce platforms, transportation companies, and many sectors of the economy. And I know you've touched a little bit on some of the issues surrounding that subject, but if you could elaborate on the importance of the de minimis provision, why it's so critical to American customers and businesses, and then there is a concern among businesses, I would say, of all sizes, that that threshold could be reduced or even eliminated, as some have proposed. and maybe talk about that impact. So.
Yeah, thank you, Senator. De minimis is extremely important, I think, and when you're talking about trade facilitation. Those small and medium businesses now have opportunities like they've never before. And if you think about what happened during the pandemic, when large-scale shipments had an issue, transiting through our ports, the e-commerce environment of sales was actually exploding and allowing goods to get to consumers who didn't have an ability to go out to the stores and procure those products. So the de minimis provision actually supports the e-commerce space to a great degree. We think that it does facilitate small and medium businesses, and that they're able to transit the trade process, which I explained is very complex, in a much more streamlined manner. I think one of the concerns that I've heard in the industry is also the amount of data and the ability of CBP to target that. CBP, as I mentioned, does have access to ACAS, which is the Advanced Security Screening data. That's filed multiple times by air carriers to make sure that the CBP has the opportunity to target that data, specifically the parties to the transaction when it comes in. And then we file a manifest that has more specific data and tells customs where it's coming, where we're landed, what's going to happen to those goods after the fact. And then we have some commercial data that's filed as well. So CBP does have the authority, the data, and the opportunity to have enforcement actions in the de minimis environment, and specifically in our hubs where they're actually located. We have, a number of seizures that result in that very robust targeting process. So I think it's important from a small to medium business perspective. It's important to continue to that process for opportunities for the American public.
And how about the proposal to change those limits?
The proposal to change the limits, we would be concerned about. We think $800 is a good amount, and I know our company worked with you in that provision in TIFTIA. The average, the data that we see, the average value is much lower than $800. And as we're moving that forward, looking at eliminating that, this allows companies to not pay a tax. Tariffs are a tax. And they, the de minimis provision has been around for a long time, basically to avoid an additional tax on goods coming into the United States for small imports. And many of those imports are, legitimate.
Okay, well, let me I want to hit one other subject here quickly, and that has to do with market access, greater market access. A lot of the, better trade facilitation obviously would be welcome development for U.S. producers and manufacturers as well, but I would argue that greater market access is really, it would provide some of the most durable and outsized results for American businesses and workers. So could you just comment quickly on why it's important to expand market access opportunities for American exporters, which according to your written statement, I believe are more than 98% small and medium-sized businesses?
Yeah, the U.S. is a leader. There's no question about that. When you go to the WTO, the WCO, those countries and those bodies look to the U.S. and say, what is the U.S. doing? So the U.S. has always had a leadership role in market expansion and also customs modernization activities. CTPAT was an idea born in the U.S. and then adopted as the AEO around the world. So we have a great opportunity to lead the world in market access. And we took a bold step in TIFTIA in doing that so that we could lead the world in market access and develop small and medium-sized businesses, not just here, but globally. And that could elevate, the economies, not just here, but also globally, which is really important. And that de minimis provision and its equivalents around the world are critical to that.
Thank you. And I would just add, in terms of the trade policy of the current administration, there is really zero that I can tell related to market access. There's a whole bunch of other things that are being contemplated and considered, but that, to me, is the fundamental issue when it comes to certainly the ag exporters that I represent. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Cantwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to ask Mr. Pickle about the Coast Guard authorization bill, which was part of the NDAA bill last year includes a number of provisions to improve identification and enforcement of illegal fishing and forced labor in the fishing industry. As you know, many agencies have a role in combating this, NOAA, CBP, and the Coast Guard. One provision requires the aim to improve identification of forced labor at sea by training federal officials so they can identify forced labor on the ground. When those officials ultimately identify the forced labor, where will that data go? How will we inform law enforcement about the flow of those goods?
Thank you, Senator. So I'm not familiar personally, I'm not in that particular role anymore within the government. What I would point out specific to IUU fishing concerns is that there are responsibilities spread across several agencies, and that there are tremendous opportunities to improve information sharing as well as joint training programs, particularly between DHS and the Department of Commerce and NOAA. In that regard, I think that gets to your question in terms of making sure that the information is readily available to make sure that the identification of suspect shipments is specifically identified at the point that it hits U.S. ports.
Yeah, you hit on it. That's what I want, interagency coordination, because it's a joint effort, and they have to share the data and information so that we can grow our capacity here.
Mm-hmm. And I think one other item I would add to that, ma'am, is to identify opportunities for engagement with industry, so that you're getting the full picture of what that industry looks like and how those commodities are coming into the U.S. market, so that those agencies have the benefit of that insight.
Great, thank you. Ms. Smith, welcome. You have experience both at CBP and in technology issues. Technology can increase customs clearance efficiency in many ways, but you still have to have staffing and resources. Do you have a view on the general staffing and resources capacity at our customs clearance at our seaports today? Do you have recommendations on what we should do to improve that?
I do, and thank you for the question. CBP is known by its people in blue, the uniform, but what I would call out are the significant number of trade specialists, analysts, auditors, and attorneys that sit behind the uniformed force that have a lot of the customs competencies that help ensure both trade enforcement and trade facilitation. As I noted in my initial statement, the investment in CBP workforce writ large since the events of 9/11 has been tremendous, but the investment in the non-uniformed trade specialist has been relatively minimal, aside from the tremendous investment made this past year in the forced labor capability. I believe very strongly that the agency needs to have the bandwidth to be able to think through what a modernized customs process looks like, implement the regulations, the processes, and the technology. And to do that, you not only need to have sufficient numbers of personnel, but they need to be well-trained in the legal frameworks, but also in how modern business works every day. And Cindy Allen mentioned the concept of bidirectional education. I think there are many companies, including my own Expeditors of Washington, that are interested in working with the government to be sure that we understand what the government is looking for and the government understands how business works on a day-to-day basis.
Do you think there's a number there? I long ago proposed increasing at USTR the number of lawyers, because I was like, well, the amount of deals that we're doing outside the United States, so if you don't have lawyers to go down to Chile or whatever and talk about illegal timber, or if you don't have people, and so we've literally fought for our businesses and consumers because we upped the legal capabilities at USTR. Is there some capacity build that we need to do here now at CBP that would do the same, understand the complexity and volume?
Yes, 100%. The numbers that I often use is in my career in trade the last 40 years, trade has multiplied 32 times. So I think it wouldn't be out of consideration to double the customs workforce. The numbers I used when I was at CBP were there are about 3,000 non-uniformed personnel that do trade on a full-time basis. Doubling that to 6,000 would make a tremendous difference in their ability to modernize, facilitate, and enforce.
And you're talking about distribution throughout the U.S. with our major ports and things
That's right.
of that nature to help catch this illegal activity.
That's right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Ms. Allen, thank you so much for being here today. Tennesseans are mighty proud of FedEx and what they have brought with innovation into the logistics industry, and it is quite appropriate that we have you before us here today. So thank you for being here. And Ms. Allen, I want to come to you. You've talked a little bit this morning about dealing with data share and how that impacts. And as we look at modernization and really delving a little bit into how we avoid a supply chain crisis like we have been through, talk for just a minute about the importance of protecting that data share, verifying that data share, and making certain that rights and responsibilities for that transmission are there so that there's accuracy in that process. I think any of us who've been to the FedEx sort at midnight, and if no one has ever been to the FedEx sort, you need to make a trip to Memphis and go through this and see. You appreciate speed and accuracy. So I wanted to give you just a moment to drill down a little bit further on that because you all have led that innovation.
Thank you, Senator, and I'm proud to be here from FedEx, and very, very nice to have you here. You know, we, in our statement, and really believe that if you get the right data at the right time from the right party, it gives CBP and the government the ability to do the right thing and make the decisions that they need to make for admissibility.
Okay, so let's stop right there. It's getting the right information in at the right time. So no mistakes on the front end. And then that will speed it along. And then I'll come back to you on something else on that. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I think that's it. The right data from the right party at the right time, and giving that to CBP ahead of time, and linking that to trusted trader benefits. You know, if you file information ahead of time about your products, you should have an ability to understand if your goods are going to be further stopped or if they're going to be released into the United States. And the more data that those companies are willing to file, the more benefits that they should get.
Now let me stop right there. How do you work with the SMEs and all of these smaller users and say this is what is going to get this flagged? So how do you all work with them? And Mr. Pickle, I'm going to come to you next on this, okay?
We work very collaboratively with our small to medium-sized enterprises. We have an education role, and we work with the Department of Commerce quite closely to get that information in the hands of the small and medium importers so that they can understand the complex processes and the information that they need to provide to make sure their goods are imported in an efficient and compliant manner. We're not necessarily educating them on, you know, what to do, but we're educating them on the laws and how it applies to their products, because most people don't really understand that. They're in the process of manufacturing or in selling their goods. They aren't experts in customs law, and that's the opportunity that we have, along with our government partners, to help them understand that and to assist when they have issues with that.
Okay. Now, Mr. Pickle, I wanted to come to you. I've appreciated your comments today, and I know Senator Crapo touched on drugs very briefly, and I think we're all astounded with the amount of drugs that were apprehended at our ports. We do know there's a lot of bad actors out there. We do know that they seem to be emboldened right now. Talk a little bit, if you will, about, first of all, how you segregate, how you say, these are questionable shippers. These are people that are following the rules, and are trying to get that education and what that red flag is for CBP?
That's a great question. And what I would say is that, we need to acknowledge on the front end that the vast majority of parties importing into the United States are tremendously compliant, right? So when you're looking at segmenting risk in the cargo environment, particularly, information is key, but the right information is key. To Ms. Allen's point, and information that's provided to CBP provides a very good basis to be able to understand the nature of a shipment that's happening. There are companies that go above and beyond to really open their books up to the government and say, here are our processes, and the government will help. CBP through the CTPAT program will work with them to understand vulnerabilities. That information needs to be shared early in the supply chain process so that those compliant parties can take their own actions to root out any causes of concern before we get to a port, right? Before we get into an enforcement scenario.
Excellent. My time's expired. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank my colleague, Senator Whitehouse, and then Senator Menendez, and others may come, but we've had so many people waiting. I want to make sure that Senator Whitehouse and Senator Menendez could be next. Okay?
Great. Thank you, Chairman. There was a famous thesis not long ago about the world being engaged in a clash of civilizations. And I tend to subscribe to that thesis, but I think its author got the boundary, the line of contact, if you will, wrong. I think the clash of civilizations that we are in is between rule of law and regimes that are criminal, kleptocratic, and autocratic. And one of the perils that we on the rule of law side of that clash of civilizations face is the support within rule of law jurisdictions for assets amassed by the kleptocrats, the autocrats, and the criminals who know that if they leave it at home, some bigger kleptocrat, autocrat, or criminal is going to come and steal it. So they come and seek refuge behind rule of law, and they seek that refuge anonymity. In order to get those assets where they want to hide them, money laundering is the best tool. And there are lots of ways we hunt down money laundering, and I want to thank Senator Crapo for his leadership in the beneficial ownership battle that we had so that U.S. shell corporations are no longer such an obvious tool for money launderers and kleptocrats and criminals. But trade-based money laundering has now emerged as a means of accomplishing this foul purpose. And trade-based money laundering is a little bit difficult to track because the symbol of it may be a perfectly innocuous package of goods that is perfectly legal in every respect. And if you were to take that package apart and inspect every part of it, you would find no contraband or nothing wrong. But let's say it was a $750,000 set of goods. If the bill for it that went to pay for it was for $7,500,000, or if it was for $750,000, the margin is probably a way of laundering money across borders. And I'm very interested in that context, particularly Ms. Smith from you, with how we get. I'm working with Senator Cassidy on this, and I want to signal his leadership on this issue first. But what are the things that we can do, and how can we continue to work with you to figure out the things we can do to solve this without creating a bureaucratic and reporting nightmare for people for whom it just is a $750,000 package of perfectly innocent goods for which they paid $750,000?
Very interesting issue and very timely, Senator, but tough to find. The scope that trade-based money launderers work against, $32 trillion worth of trade last year, so huge range of opportunity for them. I think when we talk about trade-based money laundering, we're really talking about the evasion of customs laws.
Yep.
And so expertise in those laws and
Although kind of in a strange way, because the delivered product itself might fall totally within the customs
Absolutely.
laws, be
Absolutely.
completely legal and innocuous. It's only when the payment moves and it isn't commensurate with the goods that then the problem comes.
That's right. And there are a number of creative ways to evade customs laws. And so having individuals at CBP and other U.S. government agencies that work with financial flows, really critical. So I would talk about expertise. I would talk about having the capacity, the number of boots on the ground to actually investigate trade-based money laundering, both on the civil side and the criminal side, so at CBP and Homeland Security investigations. And I think a free flow of information among U.S. government agencies first, and then second, their international counterparts, because it's not a crime that's limited here to the U.S. These flows go all over the world.
Well, I look forward to continuing to work with you on it. I would like to be a good ally to Senator Cassidy as we try to solve this problem, and I think getting it right will save people a lot of trouble if compared to setting up systems that don't catch what we want to catch. Thanks very much. Thanks, Chairman.
Senator Menendez, and my schedule's pretty tight now. We're going to have another vote unless there are other members that come very quickly after Senator Menendez. We're going to wrap up. Senator Menendez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One of CBP's most important jobs is to safeguard Americans from the importation of counterfeit products. These products can not only cost hardworking Americans their jobs and money, they can be dangerous, as we saw during the pandemic with the huge influx of counterfeit COVID-19 items. Mr. Meserve, Mr. Nova, can you talk about how failing to crack down on counterfeit goods harms U.S. workers?
You know, I know of a case, a few years ago where Chinese companies were sending in primary aluminum in the form of a pallet or in some type of shipping arrangement, and then it was getting sold and remelted and brought into the country that way. What we make at my plant is what we call SAL. It's an internationally recognized good. It's got a shape, a size, a weight, and the LME sets the price for that. And we have to work within that margin of a price point to be profitable. And if somebody's bringing in a good that's in the wrong shape or wrongly marked or mislabeled, then yeah, it definitely hurts.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Nova, you have any insights on that?
Just say it's part, I think, of the broadest challenge we face is that we have a trading system that frequently allows goods produced illegally overseas to be imported and sold here, whether that illegality is in the context of counterfeiting or the use of forced labor. And we need a much more aggressive approach to policing that trade to ensure that people cannot benefit from abusive and unlawful conditions overseas by selling products in the U.S.
Yeah. This issue is only growing. According to the most recent report on intelligence property rights seizures, in fiscal year 21, CBP seized more than $3.3 billion worth of counterfeit goods compared to $1.3 billion in fiscal year 20, so almost 3 times as much. The report indicates that China and Hong Kong account for more than half of the products seized. Ms. Smith, how can we better combat the influx, I should say, of counterfeit products from countries like China?
2 things, Senator. I think, one, the continued partnership between the government and the private sector, particularly the rights holders. They know their business, they know their products, and they can help educate and collect intelligence on the ground, which is useful to the government as they target counterfeit shipments. I think the second thing that we have to be sure of is that the U.S. government has the ability to enforce its penalties on overseas actors. That can be a challenge. The enforcement process is lengthy, And it often does result in not being able to collect the penalty, collect the additional duties, because they can't reach the individual that caused the importation in the first place.
Well, we'll have to look at that as a little bit of a potential foreign relations aspect. We'll have to look at that. The goal of tariffs is to pressure foreign governments to live up to their commitment to American workers and companies by forcing foreign producers to make price concessions or lose customers. However, too often when tariffs are imposed, they end up punishing U.S. importers with goods that are already in transit. Ms. Allen, Mr. Pickle, is it fair or effective trade policy to impose tariffs on goods that are already in transit when the tariffs are announced?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. I will tell you, as someone who has to apply those tariffs at the time of entry, it's a very complex environment today. Some dates for tariffs or other trade actions happen at time of export, some at time of arrival, some at time of entry, which can be different dates. And it's complex, so we'd like to have an opportunity to streamline that. Also, have predictability for our customers to know that additional tariffs are going to be applied to their goods before they're shipped. That way they have better predictability and contain those costs and understand how it's going to impact their operations in the U.S.
Mr. Pickle?
Senator, no, it's not fair to have those surprises that are impacting not only American businesses but also American consumers as well. Those business decisions and purchasing decisions are made well in advance of the finalization of the tariff actions, and I believe the action you're suggesting would be appropriate.
Yeah, that's why Senator Cassidy and I introduced the Fair Tariff Act in the last Congress. It would exempt goods that are already in transit from additional tariffs and require a standardized 60 days notice before new tariffs take effect. That would ensure that the burden of tariffs falls on their intended targets and not on innocent importers. And so I think, Mr. Chairman, a consistent standard that protects goods on the water from surprise tariffs benefit importers without compromising the effectiveness of our trade policy. And we look forward to working with Senator Cassidy and with you, hopefully, to move it forward. Thank you.
Senator Menendez, your leadership with Senator Cassidy is much appreciated. This is an extraordinarily important issue and look forward to working with you. And Senator Crapo and I have been saying throughout this is going to be a bipartisan issue. I want to say to our guests, it's a pretty hectic time right now. Otherwise, I would make a profound closing address. This is an extraordinarily important issue. This is not an abstraction. In other words, you have these debates about trade policies and trade rules, and it sounds like a lot of alphabet soup and the like. But it's really about, as Mr. Meserve talked about, it's about the hopes of all these working families that if they can just get a level playing field, they're going to be in a position to outcompete anybody anywhere. And so that's what it's about. We got a lot of work to do. You'll hear more about us soon as we evaluate the responses from the big automobile companies. There we're talking about thousands and thousands of workers, and we are not going to sit around and see forced labor undercut their hopes, as Mr. Meserve has talked about. And we'll have more to say shortly. I'm going to close by saying Senator Brown, of course, been a critical leader on stopping forced labor, leveling the playing field for U.S. workers. Couldn't be here. He's home in Ohio advocating for the people of East Palestine who are facing an environmental disaster. And he's got questions for witnesses that we'll submit for the record. And we look forward to your answers. And also, it's the process of the Senate Finance Committee. The questions for the record will be due in a week on Thursday, February 23rd. I thank all of you. I thank my colleague. We're going to tackle this in a bipartisan way. And with that, the Finance Committee is adjourned.